Let's talk about how to get your team performing to expectations again without a PIP. I have worked with so many people managers from Fortune 100 companies to nonprofits, healthcare, education, and more, and I've heard this story over and over again. Let me know if you can relate. You've got someone on your team who is very capable, and yet they're not performing to expectations. You honestly can't even figure out why. You're a good leader. You've done everything that you can think to do. They are a seemingly capable person, and yet still there is a disconnect, which leaves you having the same conversation on repeat, beginning to wonder, am I missing something? How do I get through to them? Are they just not capable of this? I've heard it a lot and have helped a lot of leaders work through this because ultimately the issue is there are tools that no one ever taught you, and that's what I'm going to cover in this video. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Vahey Smith. I have over 10 years of experience leading teams cross culturally, intergenerationally, with neurodivergence, and with a trauma informed approach. I have a Master's of Arts in Applied Linguistics, which means that I am very focused on how exactly we communicate well. And recently, I've been working to coach all of the different leaders I just mentioned to help them get their team performing up to expectations by the end of the quarter. So, what I would like to do in this video is break down exactly how I do that. There are three major pillars. The first one is clarity without repetition. The second one is capacity without skipping the work. And the final one is consistency without handholding. Now, before I explain how we're going to do each one of those, I want to start with a foundational belief that I think a lot of people get wrong. Oftentimes, when leaders are thinking about support versus accountability, they see support as giving people slack or even picking up their slack, where they see accountability as rigidity. And when you define those terms in that way, it's really hard to do both at the same time. They're opposites, but those actually aren't the right definitions that we should be using. Let's think about it this way instead. Support is how can I help you? And accountability is how do we make sure this task gets done? So then supportive accountability is how do I help you make sure this task gets done? When we think about it that way, then support and accountability at the same time become scaffolding that we're using to give our team members the ability to be able to thrive in their work. And that's the ultimate goal for them and also for you because everyone deserves to thrive at work. So let's get into it. When we're thinking about clarity, the issue I see a lot of leaders having is that they are constantly repeating themselves over and over and over again, and we're exhausted. But we're also at this place where you might feel stuck thinking, I don't know any other way to explain it than what I have just said, and really not knowing how to break that cycle. So I want to use my background in linguistics to help us break through. The first thing that we are going to do is define our expectations because oftentimes we end up using abstract terms that maybe mean different things to different people. Just like support can mean slack for one person, where it means help for someone else. So we want to define these abstract terms into very concrete expectations. Literally, what is it that you want them to do? Next, what we want to do is diagnose barriers. Oftentimes, we say something to try to communicate. That message does not go through. And so we think, I don't know how else to explain this to you. So we say the exact same thing again. And the same thing happens, right? So we just circle it back, maybe a third attempt, maybe a fourth attempt. And really what we have to do is take a break and recognize there is something in the way. There is something between me and the person that I am talking to. And that is why every time I try to communicate, I feel like I'm running into a glass door. I have identified 7 barriers to communication, and I have them all in a quiz that you can take, and I'll drop the link below so you can go take this quiz and figure out which one of the 7 barriers to communication are you dealing with, and how do we break through that. After you've diagnosed the barrier to communication, you've got a good plan on how to regroup and get past that barrier. Now we've opened up the metaphorical glass doors, and saying it again is likely to be a lot more successful. One, because we're using concrete expectations now. Two, we've gotten rid of the glass doors. But the third thing that we want to do is design narratives, because it's really hard to get on the same page with somebody if we're not even in the same book. And so, what we want to be listening for in these conversations are, where is this other person coming from? How do they perceive this assignment that I've given them, their spot on this team, the work that they do in this company? Are they thinking about this work the same way that I am? And if they're not, how do we craft a story that helps us perceive this work from the right viewpoint? For example, I was working with a manager at a Fortune 100 company, and they were about to have some major changes that left them very under equipped to do the job that they have been given. No one was super excited about this change, and so what we did was referenced a TV series, Survivor, and we told this story that this team was being put on an island with subpar resources and still expected to do this work, and they were going to win. And so, with this narrative, it really reframed how everyone on the team was thinking about this challenge. Instead of it being an impossible thing that they were subjected to, it became an interesting thing that they were ready to rise up and meet to see how exactly they were going to overcome these obstacles. So, what making it harder than it has to be for your team member to do the thing that you need them to do? And what story would make it easier for them if they were perceiving the situation through that lens? So, we're going to combine all of those things together into our unmiscommunication conversation. Now, unmiscommunication, I deeply believe that miscommunication is inevitable. As complicated as language is, as complicated as communication is, it's honestly a miracle that we can understand each other at all. Perhaps you're familiar with the game of telephone, which we use to illustrate how inevitable miscommunication is. And yet, when miscommunication happens in real life, we're surprised and offended and affronted that it happened at all. So instead, this concept of unmiscommunication, I want to reorient us. We want to recognize that miscommunication is inevitable. And then, how do we operate based off of that understanding? What we want to do is troubleshoot our communication. When we've recognized, oh, this isn't landing clearly, we are going to make sure that we're using shared terms. And if we're speaking too abstractly, we want to make that concrete. We want to step back and say, what is the barrier to communication that I'm having right now? And we want to solve for that. We also want to make sure that we're in the same story and on the same page. And so this unmiscommunication conversation is going to help us unmiscommunicate and get on the same page right now so that we can move forward together. The way that I love to run an unmiscommunication conversation is by starting with, why are we having this conversation now? Orient them into whether it's the beginning of a quarter, the beginning of a season, the beginning of the week, or you can say, I just took this training and what I learned was that I could be communicating a whole lot better. So I want to use this as an opportunity to just kind of reset myself and make sure that I'm communicating really clearly what the expectations are. So we want to start with why now? And then we're going to move into what was our abstract goal? What was the thing that we've been saying this entire time? And we do this in order to link it into the broader conversation. You're not coming out of left field with something entirely new. This is what you've been talking about the whole time, but you're going to reframe it. You're going to talk about it a little differently. And we're going to pull in those narratives that we want to use to help us reframe this conversation. Then what we're going to do is lay down those very concrete deliverables. And finally, we want to invite grappling. Grappling is a term that I use to talk about wrestling with feedback without arguing, with the feedback. A lot of times when people start asking us a ton of questions about the feedback we've given them, we can feel a little defensive about that. Like, are you arguing with me? Are you trying to push back on me? When the other person is really just trying to deeply understand what's happening. And so by using this term grappling, we can frame how they're interacting with the feedback as trying to understand it more thoroughly. This helps us not take it defensively, and this helps them also remember that they're not arguing, they're trying to reach understanding. So, using this key term can really help in your unmiscommunication conversation. The ultimate goal here is that we would achieve that aha light bulb moment where the sparks come on behind their eyes and you recognize that finally they get it. Now, I know that you may have already, in this conversation or previous conversations, achieved the light bulb moment, and that the light bulb moment isn't always enough to see the consistent follow through. That's why this is only step one, and then we're going to head off to step two, capacity without skipping the work. Sometimes the reason why our team member can't do the thing is because they're drowning in stress. Whether they're drowning in stress because there is legitimately too much work under their plate is one thing, but more often from leaders, what I hear is that there's actually a reasonable amount of work on this person's plate, and still they are struggling to deal with that. Often, when we feel like someone's plate is overloaded, the obvious solution is to remove things off of their plate. But when they actually have a reasonable workload, what I want to do instead of removing things off of their plate is actually expand their plate, help their plate, their capacity grow. And the way that I do that is with the RISE capacity model. I have done research on what helps people thrive even during intensely stressful situations, and I found four key factors. Let me lay them out for you right now, and then we'll talk about how we can apply them. So, the first one is reset tactics. This is I, as an individual, have the ability that even while the world is chaos, I can reset and feel stable in myself again. This includes things like mindsets and also somatic ability to regulate our nervous system. All of that falls into reset tactics. The second of the RISE capacity factors is initiative. This is my ability to do something that makes the situation better, whether 10% or by 100%. Now, oftentimes people start feeling very helpless in situations. They think, oh, I can't fix it. Focusing on that 100%. In initiative, we want to welcome being able to do something that makes the situation 10% better. Because if you can make the situation 10% better, then you're not helpless. And often, one 10% leads to another 10%. The third one of the RISE capacity factors is social support. This is the idea that I've got people around me who have my back in this situation. It doesn't matter what stressful situation you're going through, it is a whole lot easier when you know that you don't have to watch your own back. And it's a whole lot more stressful when you actually have to. The fourth one is systemic efficacy. This is that there are systems in place that actually work. This is in sharp contrast to systems that pretend to work but do not actually work. When all four of these RISE factors are in place, the experience of stress plummets. In the research interviews that I conducted, I interviewed one Vietnam War vet, and he told me this harrowing war story. When I asked him if he would consider that trauma, though he was diagnosed with PTSD and could point to many episodes that created trauma for him, this particular story was not one. And as I analyzed the data later, what I saw is that he had all four RISE factors in place. Now, when I pull out stories from corporate workspaces that are stressful situations with all four factors in place, they actually seem like not a big deal at all. Because when you are in a workplace capacity and you have the right mindsets, you believe that you can do something to make the situation better, you've got a team of people supporting you, and you have systems that actually work, well, it doesn't really matter how big the stress is. It doesn't feel stressful when we've got those things in place. So, in this section where we are building capacity without skipping the work, we want to use the RISE capacity model first and foremost to stabilize ourselves. Because I know that the burnout epidemic has hit people managers the hardest. And sometimes we lack the capacity to be able to support anyone else. So, what we're going to do first and foremost is check these rise factors and say which ones of these do I have in place and which ones do I desperately need? And then, how do you create an action plan in order to achieve that? I actually have a free link for that resource, which is in the handouts linked below. Second, what we want to do is reduce manufactured urgency. There are a couple different places that manufactured urgency might emerge. The first one is from your teammate themselves. Sometimes they put pressures upon themselves that are not needed or necessary at all. They're making their own work harder for themselves. And so, where that is the case, we want to help solve those problems, help them reset, reframe how they're thinking about that. And that goes back to designing narratives. The second place is from us, ourselves. Sometimes, again, we need to make sure that we stabilize ourselves first before we move into this step. But sometimes we are just feeling so overwhelmed. We're creating some of that urgency that objectively didn't need to be there. Sometimes manufactured urgency comes laterally. It comes from our colleagues or it comes from our reports colleagues. And so they're getting this heaped on them laterally. Or it can come from on top. And so it's upper leadership that is putting this level of urgency down below and it's trickling down the hierarchy and it didn't even need to happen. So, where there are places where we recognize this urgency is manufactured, it's not needed. What we want to do is reduce that wherever possible because work is stressful enough without fake urgency on top of it. Finally, we want to use the RISE capacity model for our team members. Do they have the reset tactics that they need? Do they have initiative, the ability to do something to make the situation better in the right areas? Do they have social support that they need? And are there systems that are actually working to support them? And do they know what those systems are? Once all four of those RISE factors are in place for you and your direct report, then they should have the capacity to be able to do the thing that you've already provided clarity on. So now, with clarity and also capacity, there's only one thing in the way of them performing to expectations. So many teams that I work with have no real accountability. Whether it's because our team members do not want any accountability, or whether it's because we don't like having difficult conversations, accountability can be fleeting. And again, if you're thinking about accountability like rigidity, no wonder. But we want to think about accountability as supportive accountability. How can I help you make sure this task gets done? When we're coming at it from that angle of scaffolding, not a lot of people have a problem with it. But what we really want to step away from is the piece where we have to handhold consistently. And so instead, we want for them to consistently do the thing that we need them to do on their own without us having to prompt or redirect them or repeat ourselves over and over and over again. In order to do this, I like to use behavior architecture. And so in behavior architecture, we are thinking, how can I design this situation to make it so easy for you to do the thing? Because as humans, we are going to take the path of least resistance. So I use 3 steps. The first one is simplify the action. How can I make the thing that I'm asking them to do as simple as possible? Absolutely streamlined and frictionless. Simplify that action. The second thing that I want to do is block drift. Instead of having them default to the behavior that I want them to stop doing, I'm going to make it harder for them to do that behavior. When I make it harder to do that, then they're going to streamline into the route that I've prepared to be a frictionless, easy option for them. Thirdly, we need to anchor habits. We need enough repetitions of the positive behavior in order to anchor that into an actual habit. Now, I like to use BJ Fogg's model of behavior, where he says that behavior equals motivation plus ability and prompt. Now, a lot of leaders like to start with motivation. They think, how can I motivate you to want to do the thing? It's harder to start there. Instead, what we want to do is start with the prompt. How do they remember to do the thing at all? And how can we put prompts in place or help them think about how they can put prompts in place so that they remember at the right time when they have the ability to do the thing. And that is going to streamline this and create the repetitions that we need in order to see a habit being formed. When we line up all three of these pieces, where we have clarity without repetition, capacity without skipping the work, and consistency without hand holding, what we're going to see is that very quickly and easily, our team members start being able to perform to expectations. And more often than not, what I see is that these team members, once empowered, more than meets expectations, they're exceeding expectations and becoming MVPs on your team. I hope this video has given you a ton of ideas that you can take and run with. And I know that sometimes the answer sounds simple, but it's harder to execute, which is why I developed a whole suite of tools to make each one of these feel so much easier to do. So if you would like more support, I've got two options available. One is just the information, all of the tools packaged into a 3-day training. So you get a ton of information and the ability to take it and run with it. But for some people, more than a deluge of information, what they want is support to help them think through all of the different facets, troubleshoot as they go, and have someone holding them accountable to help hold their team accountable. If that's more your speed, then you'll want to check out the coaching program. You can find both of those options below. I would love to support you in your journey to help your team perform to expectations in 90 days.